Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to today's session of the Hindu analysis. Before we go deeper into the Hindu newspaper of today, a couple of important announcements. Number one, this weekend, Saturday on the 9th of July, Sarmat sir will be presenting for you an important workshop where we will be discussing and decoding all the intricacies related to the UPSC Civil Services syllabus. If you are someone who is planning to prepare for the next year's examination or year after that, this is going to be an extremely important and vital workshop for all of you. It is absolutely free of cost and it will be live on the BYJU'S Exam Prep app. So don't forget to download the app from the Play Store. The link to register for the workshop is given in the description of the video. Also, tomorrow on 8th of July at 8 p.m. live on our YouTube channel, I will be bringing to you the explained session where we will be taking a deep dive into the much debated Roe versus Wade judgment about abortion rights in the US, and we'll also be discussing about the abortion rights and its status in India and in other nations across the world. It's going to be a live session tomorrow, 8th of July, over here on the YouTube channel. So do join us for that as well. The first article that we have for you from the Hindu newspaper today is about India's position in the world currently. The author here is pointing out that India is trying to play a balancing act very carefully. If you look at the past few days, there have been three extremely important conferences that have been held. We have held the virtual BRICS conference, which was hosted by China, was also attended by the Indian Prime Minister virtually. We also had the G7 summit. As you know, India is not a part of the G7, but India, along with some other nations such as Argentina, Senegal, etc., were invited to the G7 summit as special invitees for this year. Then we also had the NATO summit. India, of course, is not a member of NATO and we did not attend this. The author here says if you look at these three meetings that were held recently, they point out towards something very interesting, that is a balancing act that India and some other nations such as Indonesia are trying to play. For example, while India attended the BRICS summit, it gave a signal to everyone that we are not going to leave the side of Russia in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine crisis, despite a lot of reminders and despite a lot of requests by the Western nations. Also, the interesting part is India did manage to ensure that the joint statement of the BRICS summit which is given, it does not say anything critical about the Western nations, because the Indian Prime Minister just after that had to go and attend the G7 meeting. So he knew that there has to be a balance that has to be made between the two, and he was successful there. While he did support the BRICS and their initiatives, he also ensured that the BRICS does not criticize what the Western nations are doing. Exactly the same was done when he was in the G7 summit. Although most of the G7 members have openly criticized Russia and its actions, even then, in the G7 summit, India was able to ensure that the common statement that is going out after the G7 summit does not criticize Russia and does not have anything bad to say about China. As per the author, India has had a major role to play in the way that these joint announcements were made after the summit. Because in NATO, India was nowhere to be found, that was a summit which was extremely critical of Russia. Now, for us, it is the most relevant to look into the BRICS summit, because BRICS is a partnership where India is an integral part and we see ourselves playing a very important role there. In the BRICS summit, India showed its complete support to Russia. In fact, in the BRICS summit, Prime Minister also lauded the practical and other challenges that the Western-led sanctions have had against Russia. That is why the new development bank, that is the bank of the BRICS nations, has approved about 17 loans, especially for the Russian energy and infrastructure projects that have been targeted by the Western sanctions. The BRICS Payment Task Force was also created to have a system with their central bank so that it can be an alternative to SWIFT payment system. As you know, Russia, after its war on Ukraine, has been carved out of the SWIFT payment system, which is making it difficult for the Russian banks and the Russian companies to deal with in international currency. Russia also committed to providing more oil and gas supplies to the other BRIC member nations, including India and China. So if India was not careful, BRICS could have been a platform where India would have antagonized most of the Western nations. But thankfully that did not happen, which points out towards a successful foreign policy and a great balancing act by the Indian Prime Minister. Then at the G7 summit, as I said, India avoided Russian criticism and also made sure that the nations at large don't use a platform for the same. In NATO, that was not the case because we were not concerned with NATO as such. Now, the interesting part is by attending the BRICS summit, although virtually, we have also given a hand towards China, a country with whom we still have ongoing hostilities at the border. Because this year's BRICS summit was actually hosted by China, although it was virtual summit, but it was like China sharing the Zoom link with everyone, they setting the password because everyone was attending virtually. But even then, China was the host country. So by sharing the same stage or sharing the same screen with China, we have shown that we are ready to go ahead and make amends with our relationship with China. So much so that India's ongoing trade with Russia, which has increased after since the Ukraine crisis because of the discounted crude oil that we are getting, India is even paying in Chinese yuan to the Russian government so that we can circumvent the sanctions. As you know, Russia is not accepting dollar payments anymore and they are asking the other nations to pay either in the Russian ruble or in some other currency such as the Chinese yuan, which is accepted at the other places. This also gives a signal that India is not going to be backing down from supporting Russia. In fact, on the contrary, we have increased our intake of Russian oil. We have also been signing multiple defense deals with Russia and also trying to collaborate on other aspects as well. Now, in this equation, an important role is also being played by Indonesia. As you know, the G20 summit will be on in Indonesia soon. Now, this G20 summit, in fact, which is starting today, has been boycotted by multiple member nations. These member nations have boycotted it, especially because Mr. Vladimir Putin will be here because Russia also is a part of G20. Now, what happened was many nations, especially the Western nations, had urged Indonesia not to invite Russia and instead only have 19 participants instead of G20. Now, what Indonesia has been doing is they have been trying to lobby with Russia and Ukraine and trying to bring them closer in some way or the other. Look at it from Indonesia's point of view. Hosting a summit such as G20, where 20 of the most powerful people will be in your country, is a great advertisement for your country. Every nation wants such a platform to be utilized for their advertisement. No country would want that when their turn came, a lot of members boycotted it. So Indonesia especially has been holding multiple talks to play the peacemaker. You also have to remember that just like India, Indonesia also is one of the founding members of the non-aligned movement. So they also have a history of bringing two sides together which don't see eye to eye. And they're trying to do the same. The author says that India can also do the same here, especially because after Indonesia, from 1st of December, the leadership of G20 comes to India and the Indian government will be organizing the next G20 summit. So India must ensure that we are one of the few nations that can talk from both the groups and we utilize that position. It was a similar kind of a situation in 1950s which led to the creation of the non-aligned movement, where a group of few nations, not very powerful, decided not to join either of the two groups led by the Soviet Union and the US and charted a new path in the form of the non-aligned movement. Maybe it is time to think again and walk on the same dotted lines as per the author. As I said, Indonesia has been trying extremely hard to meet up with both the sides. In fact, recently the Indonesian met with Vladimir Putin also and Mr. Zelensky also and was trying to find a common ground. But as you can understand, this is much easier to say than actually do in reality because of the ongoing crisis and the seriousness of this situation. So it still remains to be seen if it actually has any impact on the ground. Also, since BRICS is the most relevant for us out of all these conferences that were held, let me give an example of a few important initiatives that the BRICS nations have taken together. Now, BRICS, as you know, comprises of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It started as BRIC only, a group of 4 nations, while South Africa joined later on. Now, BRICS nations have been trying to establish a separate parallel world order. saying that international organizations such as the IMF, World Bank are obsolete and they favor the Western nations much more than they actually deserve. That is why the BRICS nations have set up their own new development bank also, which can be an alternate to the World Bank. This bank has in fact approved 70 infrastructure projects and sustainable development projects around the world, mainly in the BRICS nations only. We also have the contingent reserve agreement, which will work kind of like IMF, where the BRICS nations set up this fund so that if any other nation has a short term balance of payment pressure, then they can take help from here. Very similar to how the IMF works. We also have the BRICS payment system, the alternate arrangement to the SWIFT payment system, which again is dominated by the central banks of the Western nations. All these have been initiatives taken by BRICS from time to time. The only problem is that in the past few years, because our relationship with China has turned sour, we did not really pay a lot of attention to BRICS and rather focus on other groupings such as the Quad. But it seems that now the government wants to balance out each and every initiative that we are a part of. The next article that we have here is written on the occasion of 5-year anniversary of the GST. As you know, the GST, that is a goods and services tax, now completes 5 years. It was first introduced in the country in 2017. We have had multiple discussions about the GST. Has it been good or bad? Why is it that the states are demanding that they should still get compensation after 2022 also? We have also discussed the Supreme Court judgment about GST and how the central government cannot force its wish on the state governments. But this particular article is actually taking a different point of view about the GST. In this article, these two professors of economics have actually tried to see the impact of the GST. So what they have done is they have calculated using multiple models what impact has the GST had on inflation. Because when GST was introduced, the government actually promised that after GST, because the cascading effect or the problem of tax on tax will be cut down, inflation will actually reduce. However, the numbers show a different story. If you look at 12 months before the GST implementation and 12 months after the GST implementation, there is a big change in the CPI inflation. In the post GST period, the CPI inflation actually increased. Now, there can be many factors which are responsible for it. But the interesting story is that the same happened in other nations also which implemented the GST from time to time. Nations such as Australia, New Zealand, Canada, all of them have GST regime, slightly different as compared to India. But all of these nations saw same kind of rise in inflation with the coming of the GST. Now, in theory, it should not happen. In theory, the GST should not lead to a change in the overall inflation. Rather, the prices of commodities should decrease because the recurring tax and the cascading effect of tax has been cut down. But the authors here point out that the study showed that if GST would not have been used, then the CPI inflation would only have been 3.24, means lesser than what we actually saw after the GST. However, there have been other impacts of the GST as well. For example, GST has had a positive impact, means it has raised the prices due to inflation on commodities such as pan, tobacco, intoxicants, clothing, footwear, etc. On the other hand, those food and beverages that are included in the GST have had a negative impact, means they have actually seen a drop in the prices. That is what has been the major takeaway of the GST as per these authors. The authors also say that there can be other factors at play as well. For example, inflation after the GST came into being could also be due to the rise of tax rates on some goods and services. As you know, the GST Council keeps on changing the tax slabs on multiple commodities as it did recently as well. So that might also have a change in the entire pricing structure. So we can't really blame the GST only for that. You don't have to go into details of how their model works. What you have to understand and take away from this article is their conclusion that the GST has led to increase in inflation just like other nations as well. And the study has shown that if we would have continued without the GST, the inflation would have been lower. Also, there is one interesting thing to point out here. This inflation that we are taking is a consumer price index. The authors also say that the consumer price index has a lot of commodities which don't even come under the GST. So we can't give all the blame of this rise in CPI to the GST only. Now, there's a lot of important information I wanted to share with you about GST specifically. For example, this is the trend of GST collection in India in billion rupees in the last 2.5 years. From April 2019, you can see how the GST collection has changed. It came to its lowest point during the pandemic in the first lockdown, that is April 2020, which was the most strict lockdown. After that, it has been pretty robust. But if you actually see on an average, the average collection in the past 2 years has not increased, barring a few months. Now we are seeing, especially in the second half of 2021, that the collections are increasing. But overall, there has not been a very major jump in the collection of the GST in the past 2 years. Also, if you look at different nations around the world that have implemented the GST, you would see that there are different types of tax rates that have been used. India is one of the few nations that have multiple tax slabs under the GST. So we have taken up an average tax slab of 15%. But then don't be under the impression that India puts the highest GST across the world. There are nations such as Italy, Argentina, UK, France that have 20 or more than 20% of usual average GST or VAT rate. So India by no means is at the highest position when it comes to the GST slab. Also, the government of India has also been celebrating the 5 years of GST. The Ministry of Finance has come up with this initiative of nudge. Now, nudge means not punishing anyone, but just nudging or slightly pushing the person in the right direction. Under the nudge initiative, the government of India has said that we will be sending reminders to those people who have not filed their GST returns. We'll be sending SMSs to default taxpayers regarding the late fee. We'll be educating them and making them much more aware so that we can increase our GST collection without punishing anyone unless a person is a willful defaulter. The next article that we have here is focusing on India EU global dynamics. But the most interesting part is if you actually look at the article, in the first 3/4 of the article, basically in the first 75% of the article, there is not even any mention of India. But the topic says India EU relationship. India is only mentioned in the very, very last end of this article. Anyway, so what this article is about is EU has always been trying to set an example when it comes to fight against climate change. EU has always said that they want to be the first region in the world to become carbon neutral by 2050. In that effect, what EU has done is they have introduced a new agreement called the European Union Green Deal. This is an agreement that has a lot of important pointers. But the most important pointer that we will talk about is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. This is a part of Fit for 55 package. Fit for 55 means the EU is trying to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 55%. That is called Fit for 55. In this package, the most important component is a policy called Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Now let me tell you in very simple terms what does it mean. So EU is saying, let's assume in our country, one of the industries is importing something, let's say from China or India. Let's assume they are importing a mobile phone from China. Then when the mobile phone comes into EU, they will ask China, how much pollution did you actually do while making this mobile phone? Or how much emissions did your industry do while making this mobile phone? Let's say China gives a number that we did X pollution while this mobile phone was made in the industry. Then EU will compare that if the same mobile phone is made in EU, then how much pollution is usually done. If it is lesser than X, let's say it is X by 2, then the difference between this will mean that there will be a tax imposed on that product. Higher the difference in emissions, higher will be the tax that EU will impose on the imported commodity. Simple. So tax will be on imported goods based on the difference between carbon used in the production of domestic and imported goods. Simple. If the same phone, when it is manufactured in EU, results in lesser carbon generation, as compared to the carbon generated in China, then the difference is the one that will decide the tax. In simple terms, this is the policy. Now the policy starts from Jan 1, 2023, but penalty will not start from here. From Jan 1, 2023, importers only have to tell how much emissions did they actually make while making the product. So they will be given 3 years of time to reduce that and bring it to the EU level. Once they reduce it from Jan 1, 2026, then it will start the penalty clause. Initially, it will be for the 5 sectors which are really carbon intensive: iron and steel, aluminium, cement, fertilizers, and electricity. The other part of the story is, where will this money be used? EU is saying that we will use this money as a part of our budget, we will help those affected by COVID, etc. But this is an interesting point of view that the other developing nations are saying that if we are sending product to EU and then you are putting extra taxes, you are putting penalty on that, that money should be used for developing nations' benefit only. That money should be used for green energy projects in developing nation only, to give us cleaner energy, for helping us to adopt cleaner methods so that we can actually improve our production. But EU says no, 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 that will not happen. How we use our money is our concern. You don't tell us. But developing nations are saying, if you are actually so concerned about the environment, then use this penalty for our benefit. But this has not been accepted by EU. This entire part is covered in the first 3/4 of the article. In the end comes the mention of India. So I don't know why the topic's name was EU India. But in the end it says that India and EU have recently resumed their free trade agreement negotiations. India will also be concerned about the CBAM. But India should use its good relationship with EU to cooperate in other ways as well. Asking EU to invest more in green technologies in India so that we can put up our act together and we can make products which are much more environmental friendly. This is the only thing that has been mentioned about India in this article. As I said, this is a CBAM. So the transition phase will be from 23 to 25, where most importantly, money will not be connected. Only information will be collected at how much carbon are you using. From 2026, then the money and the monetary penalty will come into the picture. It will be based on what is the difference between carbon that is used for generating that particular piece of equipment in EU as compared to when you do it outside the EU. This is Fit for 55. This is the entire package name. A part of this package is the CBAM. This Fit for 55 is policy to align new carbon reduction goal of 55% by 2030. EU has been extremely serious when it comes to fighting against climate change, although they again are a group of developed nations only, which are responsible for harming the environment in the past, but now want developing nations such as India and China to a certain extent to take action. So their hypocrisy also is not hidden from anyone. They are the ones who actually took part in industrial revolution. They are the ones because of whom environment started to become bad. But they are the ones who want the other nations to take more steps. Anyway, that is EU for you. The next article that we have for you is about the new guidelines about advertisements that has come in. The Central Consumer Protection Authority has recently issued new guidelines about advertisements, simply saying that from now onwards, false or misleading advertisements will not be allowed. As you know, the advertisements that you see on television are way, way over the top. They promise you things such as, if you eat this pan masala, the entire world will be at your feet and they will be just singing your praises. So those kind of advertisements will not be allowed. An advertisement will only be valid if it contains true and honest representation of goods and not exaggerate their accuracy. Specifically when it comes to those advertisements that are actually targeting the children, because they are the ones whose minds can be impacted very easily. And when they start forcing their parents that I want to buy something, it creates an immense pressure on the parents, even though that particular product might not be useful for that child. Also, in case there is an unintentional mistake in the ad, there will not be any penalty if advertiser takes prompt action letting the consumer know that we were wrong. But if they don't do that, then it will be taken as a punishable offense. Also, guidelines have been given to define what is a non-misleading advertisement and what are the valid advertisements. Over here, you also have to understand that these guidelines have also banned surrogate ads. Now, what are surrogate ads? You would have seen this almost every single day. There are some commodities which cannot be advertised because they are harmful for the health, like pan masala, alcohol, etc. So what do you do is, in the TV you would see ads where pan masala brand is advertising with its name but not saying pan masala. For example, they are saying Vimal Ilaichi and not Vimal Pan Masala. Then you see Kingfisher, but Kingfisher's ad is Kingfisher soda ad. They never say Kingfisher beer or something. They say Kingfisher soda. Then there's Carlsberg glasses. I don't even know if Carlsberg has glasses. Royal Seagram Blue CDs. So all these are called surrogate ads. Then you use the same name as a product. Does that because you can't advertise a product. You show everything about the product but use a different name which may not even have any market. Those are called surrogate ads. Surrogate ads also will not be allowed because they also leave a wrong impression as per these guidelines. As I said, special focus has been put on ads that target children. Goods which require a health warning also should not be advertised through children, as well as personalities from music, sports, cinema. So children cannot be in those ads which are actually harmful to the nature. Also, ads of chips, beverages, snacks, drinks, etc. should not be cast on channels which are specially for children, such as Cartoon Network. Sorry, I don't even know if Cartoon Network exists these days or not. I have not watched it for many years, but these kind of ads cannot be put on those channels which are specifically meant for children. Now it is expected that because it has been a major change, ad business is a multi-billion dollar industry. So obviously the companies most probably will appeal against this in the court because it goes against their Article 14 and Article 19 fundamental rights. So let's see if it actually upholds in the court of law or not. The guidelines also say that there should be disclaimers in the ads to clarify that a claim made in an ad may or may not be true and it might need certain more studies to be done. So in short, the ads that we see on the newspapers are all set to change as per the guidelines. Only things that are true or the claims that have been proven can be shown. You can see an example of how the perfume and the deodorant ads are actually publicized, and you do get an idea of how the ads actually show a completely false picture. These are the new guidelines in short detail. Misleading ads are those that falsely describe a product or a service, give a false guarantee. All these are banned. Surrogate advertising, misleading advertising also would not be allowed. Advertising that targets children, that develops a negative body image also will not be allowed. There should be disclaimers that should be made in same language and font as a main ad. The audiovisual ads, voiceover, etc. must be clear and not a quick one. As you see, usually when there's an ad which is of financial nature, in the end, there's a person speaking at 5x speed. Something like, investing money over here can be very dangerous for you, so we advise you not to do that, etc. So that cannot be in a very, very quick tone because the people need to hear that as well. These are all the articles we want to discuss from the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number one. What was the need to introduce a goods and services tax regime in India to replace most of the indirect taxes? Have those objectives been achieved in the last 5 years? Second. The present global scenario presents a golden opportunity for India to bring the two polarized camps together. Elaborate. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the CNA.